Look, I'm not going to ask any member to back a bill they haven't seen yet, but our members have been participating in negotiations to come up with a proposal, but we had to put legislation in front of people. That's what a final vote determines on. But we have a process that all of our members have agreed to, which brings these bills to the floor. And that means we don't do a discharge petition and we bring these bills to the floor. Members are going to reserve judgment on a final vote on a piece of legislation until and after they've read that legislation. I would expect that of any member.
Last question, Mr. Speaker. Do you view Kim Jong-un as a great guy who just wants to do right by his people and no longer poses a threat to the United States?
Look, the status quo was not working with North Korea. What was the status quo with North Korea? They were racing toward a nuclear weapon. They were racing toward having multiple independent ICBMs with nuclear-tipped warheads on top of them. The president needed to disrupt the status quo, and the president has disrupted the status quo. He should be applauded for doing that. And we should be under no delusion of our experiences with North Korea. It's a terrible regime. They've done terrible things, and they've been deceitful in the past. But it's really important that we disrupted this status quo like the president has. I'm encouraged by the negotiations that are now taking place between Secretary Pompeo and the North Koreans. The path we were on was not working. Prior administrations have failed to fix this. And so it's really important that we dealt with this issue as it was, because it wasn't going to get any better. The president should be applauded for disrupting the status quo. Now let's go get an agreement. And we should be under no delusion that this is going to be fast. This is going to take time. And we have to make sure that we have irreversible, comprehensive denuclearization of North Korea. So that's what we need to get out of this. I'm pleased the president has gotten us to the position we are in. Time will tell how this ends.
But is it dangerous to bother him?
Thank you very much.
Do you agree with the president that North Korea is no longer a threat, sir? You got one open.
So we've just been listening to Speaker Paul Ryan. He touched on a number of issues, starting with the opioid crisis and lawmakers calling on the pharmaceutical industry to participate in assisting in sort of the managing the opioid crisis, perhaps making drugs that are not addictive, but they're also painkillers. Right at the very end, he was talking a little bit about the summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and the president, and saying that he is encouraged by the negotiations. But the big story today for Paul Ryan will be a vote on 2 immigration bills that are coming up in the House. They're significant bills. They're bills that will affect DACA recipients. Those are children brought to this country illegally. One provides a pathway for citizenship. The other does not.
Right.
And the one that does is seen as a bill backed by moderate Republicans. So it will be a blow to them if neither of these bills pass. But CBS News chief congressional correspondent Nancy Cordes is following the latest on Capitol Hill. And Nancy, you know all about the details of these 2 bills and the significance of the votes happening. So lay it out for us. What's going on this afternoon?
So basically, this was a compromise that Senate and Republican leadership in the House rather needed to find in order to stave off something of an uprising among their moderate members who are very frustrated that this DACA issue has not been addressed. And they were sort of moving to hold a vote against the wishes of Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. So he has now cobbled together this compromise legislation. We really haven't seen the final text. And therefore, we don't know whether large swaths of the Republican Party are going to agree to it. But basically, it takes some of the tenets of what the moderates were seeking, some of what the more conservative members were seeking when it comes to cracking down on illegal immigration, securing the border, dealing with DACA, and so on, and putting it into a compromise bill that Democrats are still not going to like. They're not going to vote for this. So this is something that Republicans would have to take across the finish line on their own. And without seeing the fine print, at this point, Anne-Marie, we still don't know if they'll be able to do that.
And Nancy, from what I've been reading, it's not clear that either of these bills will pass. And part of the struggle is for House Freedom Caucus members, for example, as we near the midterm elections, the idea that some of these dreamers would be granted a pathway to citizenship is something that they feel would be a detriment to their reelection chances. On the other hand, same thing for moderates. Moderates feel if they can't bring some kind of resolution to the dreamer issue, that they will suffer at the polls come November. So what are you hearing?
Exactly. I mean, this is really the struggle that the House has always faced when it comes to immigration, is that depending on where these members are from, what their constituency looks like, how many immigrants they represent, their views can really radically diverge. That is why, for years, the House avoided tackling immigration reform, because it was clear that the Republican Party was sort of hopelessly divided on this issue. And it was only when the president kind of pulled the rug out from under them and said, well, we're going to be doing away with DACA, that it sort of forced Congress to go ahead and look at this issue once again. But those same divisions remain. The problem now, of course, is that you have this DACA problem that is not going away, one of several high-profile immigration controversies. It's not something that Republicans wanted to have to deal with in an election year, but you do have this small but influential group of moderate Republicans who are banging the drum and saying that this is a human rights issue, that these are young people who were brought to the country through no fault of their own. They haven't done anything wrong, and they deserve to know that they are going to be safe in this country for the long term, that they can go to school and get a job, and that they don't have to be worried that they're going to be sent back to a country they've never known.
Nancy, before we let you go, just real quick, Speaker Ryan was asked briefly about the Singapore summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. What are you hearing from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, how they're taking this? I saw a moment where John Cornyn was said, I'm from the Reagan school where I believe in trust but verify, in reaction to the president saying that he trusts Kim Jong-un. What are you hearing from lawmakers about how confident they feel that the North Koreans are really, truly on a path to denuclearization?
Sure. Well, Republicans are trying to walk a tricky path here. On the one hand, they don't want to come out and confront the president or criticize him for some of the things that he said about Kim Jong-un. You heard me ask the speaker whether he agrees with the president that the North Korean leader is a great guy who simply wants to look out for his people. And in fact, after this one summit, no longer even poses a threat to the United States, and we can all rest easy. The speaker kind of laughed because he knew where I was headed with that, and said that he's under no illusion that this is going to be difficult, that we need to hold North Korea's feet to the fire, that we need to make sure that we're getting results. But he stopped short of disagreeing with the president about the rosy picture that Mr. Trump has painted of the North Korean leader. And by and large, most other Republicans are sort of taking the same tack. They say that the president had to shake up this relationship, that what was taking place in previous decades clearly wasn't working. It was time to change course. They applaud him for sticking his neck out and having this meeting, but they are expressing significantly more skepticism about the willingness of the North Koreans to follow through than the president is at this point.
Are any of them, Nancy, willing to go on the record as to just this moment where we are in history, where we've got the president of the United States calling the prime minister of one of our oldest allies meek and mild, and some other derogatory names that were used by some of his advisors that they've since apologized for, and saying that the dictator of a brutal regime in North Korea is a terrific guy, somebody that the president trusts?
Very talented.
Very talented.
Well, right. Well, they are actually going to be doing a photo op later today with a representative of Canada's government who is appearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is something that Senate Republicans and Democrats alike are doing, clearly to make a point that they do stand by our ally to the north, and that we have historically had very good relations, and that they hope that that will continue. But no, they have been reluctant to call the president out on his spat with Justin Trudeau, or say publicly that he needs to dial it back. And part of the reason, frankly, Vlad, is because the president was out of the country. He was in Singapore, and there is this tradition, time-honored tradition, that members of Congress, for the most part, tend to follow, where they don't criticize the president when he is on foreign soil. So that might be part of the reason for their restraint. The other reason, of course, is that they don't want him to turn his fire on them. They saw what he said about Trudeau after what was really not a very harsh press conference that was held by the Canadian leader. And so no politician wants to see that kind of rhetoric turned on them.
Mark Sanford
Especially
knows
not in an
exactly
election
that.
year.
Exactly right.
Said it.
All right, Nancy, as always, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you guys.